Hello, Dazzle. Thanks for coming and hanging out with me today. I'm glad that you are here. Today, I want to talk about explanations and excuses because this is a frequent topic of conversation in the chronic illness community. Because it really doesn't matter if you have ADHD or gastroparesis, having a chronic illness leads to this strange debate of explanations versus excuses. Are they different? And if so, how? Is it ever reasonable to use your illness as an excuse? Is it ableism to accuse someone of using their illness as an excuse? And a lot of questions like this come up around this topic. So I just wanted to visit the topic for a while and talk about some of these ideas. Let's start by talking about the differences between an explanation and an excuse, because I think that we can all agree that they are different. So here's how they are defined. An explanation is a statement or account that makes something clear, a reason or justification given for an action or belief. An excuse is an attempt to lessen the blame attaching to a fault or offense, seeking to defend or justify. A reason or explanation put forward to defend or justify a fault or offense. And these are definitions from the Oxford Language Dictionary. So both are about providing a reason that something happened, but there's a key difference here: blame. When talking about making an excuse rather than providing an explanation, something has happened on a social level that there has made the person desire to assign blame. The conversation of excuses is built on the assumption that a fault or offense has occurred and that the explanation being provided is an effort to defer ownership of that. Thus, excuses are always explanations, but explanations are not always excuses. It depends on whether or not there is blame being assigned. This makes things messy because it quickly becomes a matter of perspective. Let's look at an example of this. Let's say that I was supposed to hang out with a friend, but I had a flare up and was not able to attend. My friend gets angry that I didn't attend the social event because they blame me for having the flare because they believe that I could have controlled my symptoms. After all, I've had this disorder for years and have been managing it for years. I should have had a handle on things by now. Right? This logic does make some sense. However, it fails to understand that regardless of however good a care plan is, there's always going to be flares and symptoms of the chronic illness. That's the nature of a chronic illness. Yet there's also correct that there are plenty of times that we make choices that lead to our flares. Sometimes we know ahead of time that we're going to lead into a flare based on what we chose, and sometimes we don't. Where does that lead us in this conversation? Nowhere useful. The conversation of excuses and explanations centers around the idea of control. Did you have control over how things played out, or were you a victim of circumstances? And the answer is yes. When it comes to chronic illness, we have a certain amount of control over our symptoms, and that's why having management care plans is so important. Yet we're also victims of circumstance because even when we do everything right, we can still have a flare. We could spend all day trying to tease out whether or not a person had control over their symptoms in the context of a given situation, and you'd never come to any clear conclusion. Thus, you can never really have a useful conversation that centers around this idea of excuses versus explanations. I suggest that instead you shift the conversation. And let's go back to that example that I gave before. I call and tell my friend that I can't go to the social event because I'm having a flare. That friend is upset and states that they feel I always have an excuse for not attending social events with them. Instead of engaging in whether or not this is an excuse, address the real issue at hand. You hurt your friend's feelings and they're beginning to doubt that you actually want to spend time with them. Directly addressing those two issues will be a much more productive conversation than trying to debate about what makes something an excuse versus an explanation. Start with stating the fact that you didn't mean to disappoint them and share that you're disappointed too. If this is something that's been happening a lot lately, try to brainstorm with them ways to be social with them when you're having a flare, or how to be spontaneous and take advantage of the good days when they pop up. When people see us putting in the effort like this, they're more likely to see our flares as explanations rather than excuses. Now, we all know that having a flare often means having no spoons. This conversation doesn't have to happen in the moment. You can call them up the next day or as soon as you're feeling up to it. But keep in mind that the sooner you talk about it, the better that it will be for your friendship. And let's shift the focus here. If you type in excuse and chronic illness into Google, you'll get a whole bunch of results. Many of those results are posts talking about how to avoid using your chronic illness as an excuse. But the truth is that we are the only judges of whether or not we are doing our best to control the situation or not. Time management is a huge factor, and there are definitely skills in this area that can be learned. This is also true for pacing or spoon management, but the only person who will ever know if you're making excuses or providing explanations is you. And sometimes our internal imps make that self assessment hard. The truth is that managing a chronic illness is about creating a balance. You cannot do anything just because we want to. This world builds limits around all of us. Those are real, and denying them isn't helpful. It's not an excuse to say that you can't walk because you don't have legs or you're paraplegic. This is an explanation. But creating balance means that finding other ways to get things done. You don't have to walk to get across the room. Wheelchairs can accomplish that too, but there's no amount of wishing or wanting that will make a person grow back their legs. So it might be an excuse for that person to say that they can't get out of bed because they have no legs, or it might be where they're at that moment. It takes time to learn how to do things without legs when you grew up having them. While I believe that we cannot allow ourselves to wallow in our chronic illnesses, we must also be realistic about the cards that this illness dealt us, and we have to work with what we're given. Declaring that the only thing that keeps a person from reaching their dreams is not wanting enough is toxic and a denial of the very real limitations that this world has built around each of us. None of us are going to grow wings and fly today. Maybe tomorrow when genetic research is advanced more, but not today, regardless of the amount you want it. Yet we cannot give ourselves permission to be assholes or to give up because we have a chronic illness. Being successful with chronic illness is possible. Oftentimes, creating success is more about changing our expectations than it is about reaching ceaselessly for the golden egg that is just an illusion. And sometimes using our chronic illness as an excuse should be considered fair. Giving people grace is about seeing people where they are in that moment and allowing them room to deal with whatever it is that they're tackling in their moment. There are times that we run out of spoons, yet we have no choice but to keep doing things unless we move forward with our knives. Saying it is a knife day is an excuse, but we should be allowed to have an occasional knife day, whether we have chronic illness or not. In the end, I think that what I wanted to highlight with this discussion is how complex the idea of explanations versus excuses is. We need to be very careful about making blanket black and white statements like never use your chronic illness as an excuse. Life isn't black or white. It is a whole bunch of complex swirls of gray. When we reduce complex ideas to these simple single liners, we risk cutting away fundamentally important pieces of what makes us human. Here's what's true and what's gray. Every human makes excuses, and sometimes that's all right. Thanks for joining me for this musing, and I hope that you found it to be a little bit useful. But that's about it for my rambling today. Thanks for coming and spending some time with me. If you like my rambling, then click on that like button. It really does help. And until we talk again, you guys be sure to take care of yourselves. Bye.